Well, how are you? Thank you for joining for another night. And yeah, interesting night because we had some technical difficulties tonight. So the main monitor is gone. So it's all right. I've got two more monitors to work from, so all good. But the joys of live streaming is, 15 minutes before when you turn on your monitor goes all purple and grey. But all good. So today what we're going to be covering is Rishi's spending review, or actually, do we call it Santa's spending review? Because actually, to be fair, it's pretty much all good news in terms of spending because, basically this is a massive giveaway. And I think it's the right thing to do because he had no other choice, to try and cut back the spending now after doing what he's done, and not just what he's done, but actually what all countries are doing around the world. So don't think for a minute that this is just a Rishi or a Boris initiative. This is actually, there's very few countries around the world that are restricting spending right now. Most countries that can print their own currency are doing it in bulk, So I think that's really an interesting perspective, and obviously it's a massive social experiment to see if it works out. In some ways, I'm hopeful it does. I'm also measured, the economist training in me, sort of goes, wow, that's a lot of money to be printing and that's a lot of money to be giving away. But I think it's needed. I think the alternative is that we go into massive unemployment. This is the biggest drop in 300 years. So I think, we've got to give, some acknowledgement to that. It's unprecedented in modern times. You have to go back 300 years to find anything like this when the big freeze. But what are we going to cover today? Well, pretty much the spending plan, but we've got a few other bits and pieces. So the infrastructure, which is a great thing because infrastructure creates jobs, it keeps jobs, and it keeps the economy moving, which is a good news. Leveling up, and I think this is really important because for years I've been talking about the disparity. Hold on, what's going on here? Oh, hi Brett. Hey guys, how are you? Yeah, awesome. Look, the interesting thing that I've been finding is that for years I've been talking about the fact that London's doing really well, and in fact I've pivoted our business to sell primarily London, Manchester, Birmingham, and Liverpool stuff. We've moved away from the cities and we moved away from the suburbs and things like that because there was no spending, and if government doesn't spend, then therefore the private sector doesn't spend, and the whole place just starts to dip. So this whole concept of leveling up, awesome. And we'll talk about that. I probably gave it away now, but anyway. But GDP predictions, what are they like? Because I think that's, it's interesting to see what the government, the ONS, the Office of IBS is doing. Unemployment spending, we've got to keep that, and I've been saying it since day one, we've got to keep that unemployment rate as low as possible because the moment that gets too high, it's a 2-year process. High tech, high science. And I think this is really important because we have to understand, as much as we don't look at it day to day, we've got to look to the science to help the UK because that's the industries that we're in and that's the industry we're really good at. Mortgages will slow in 2021. We'll have a look at why I think that and why I think things will slow down and potentially get worse. Prices not doubling. Some interesting stats out because we've been saying for 7 to 10 years property doubles, the biggest assumption, blah blah blah. Is that the case anymore? Okay, and the Brexit Festival and also Brexit, 30 days to go. So only 30 days. We're closing into that gap of where the final, we either have a deal, deal or no deal is coming in 30 days. I still think we're going to get a deal. I still think, and I've been saying that for a long time. All right, so let's get onto it. Awesome. But look, it's interesting times right now because we've got so many things that are affecting the marketplace, and I think that's the interesting thing is it would be great to just talk about Brexit and really focus in on Brexit and the impact on that, but you just can't do that these days. You've got to look at what all the other external factors from Trump Biden, from Trump's imbecilic adolescent, what do you even say? The guy is a child, but anyway, from that to China, and where it's going, and through to a whole range of things. What other countries are doing, how much money they're printing, how much money they're borrowing, all this sort of stuff. So yeah, it's an interesting time. So let's have a look. So infrastructure spending, £100 billion, building a stronger future. So the spending review 20 is the SR20 when you look at that. So, next phase of government infrastructure revolution of 100 billion in capital expenditure next year, 600 billion over the next 5 years. So this is serious money getting put towards schools and hospitals and, transports and all these sort of things. Now, interestingly, we might say 600 billion, that's great. And these are just some excerpts. You don't need to read them basically. But I think the interesting thing with here is that we talk about 600 billion, which sounds, wow, that's, wildly outlandish. But the reality is, if you look at HS2, which is considered to cost over $1 trillion now, because originally it was, I think it might have been 600 at the start, and it's just doubled and tripled, gone up and gone up. I mean, that's the problem now, But you know what? I don't care, because the fact that they are spending rather than retracting is the important thing. Yeah, and I think that, above all else, is what will see us through the next couple of years. All right, and no matter where you look, all the stats, all this sort of things. Now, yes, you can look at the doomsayers, that will say a lost decade, we're going to the Great Depression, all that sort of stuff. I'm not seeing that, and in fact, most economists and most predictions are not seeing that. They're seeing the next 2 years, 2021, 2022, will be shaky, but not not devastation. And I think that's the important bit. This is not devastating. Okay, so infrastructure is a great thing, and the reason infrastructure is so good is because the people who build that infrastructure are the carpenters and the bricklayers and the various companies around there. It's not necessarily dumping into the rich; it's actually getting into the poor who do the contract and the subcontract and all that sort of stuff, and then they can go spend. Okay, and that's the key to coming out of a recession. Whether it be building new build homes, whether it be rebuilding infrastructure, now is the time to be doing infrastructure from a government perspective. You don't necessarily do it when you're at the top. Yeah, you do it when you need to come out of the bottom, and I think that is key, and that's where these things are great news. Okay, so 100 billion for leveling up all the regions, and I think this is key too. This has been one of my biggest frustrations for a long time. Look, it's frustrating because you see these places, and many of you may not know, but I got to the UK in 2002, and one of the first things I did was I then went and toured the whole country running property seminars. Went up and down from everywhere, from Edinburgh down to down south, Bristol, and all sorts of places. And so I got to see the country. In fact, I've probably seen more of the country than most English people, which we don't need to compete on that. But the reality is, it was, it's a fantastic country. But what I saw come 2008 with the global financial crisis is that so many places just got ignored. And the issue with that is that they've been now over 10 years of being ignored. And what I mean by ignored is, no infrastructure, no major, investment, no spending in those areas. If anything, cutting back. Social programs, infrastructure programs, everything, NHS, everything, yeah? And so that's almost shrunk them down, yeah? So it's good to see now that turning around. And really, a lot of that was more focused on, the non-London, non-main city areas. And let's face it, as a business, in 2012, we had to look at it and go, you know what, this government is not spending in these areas. So there's no reason for the house prices to go up. So we're pulling out of those places. Yeah? But now they're putting money into them. Maybe there's some hope for them. I still don't think there's going to be enough to warrant, for me as an investor, I want to stick to the area where the best fundamentals are. So I don't think there's enough spending, there's enough encouragement in everywhere to just go carte blanche everywhere. Which 25 years ago, if you bought anywhere and sit it around and waited, don't wait to buy property and wait, we used to say. I'm not sure that's true anymore. You have to put the big asterisk, which is buy with the best fundamentals. And when you do that, you're fine, yeah? So GDP. Now, this is an interesting one, amid unusually high levels of uncertainty, which totally this is right now. The OBS says 11.3 fall in 2020, so that's this year. Yeah, which if you remember, we had 20.4 or 20.2, during the lockdown. So a massive drop. So overall for the year, 11.3. 5% growth. Now, this is the important thing. Forget the numbers there. Growth, 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 growth. So once this year's done, which let's face it, it's December, the year's done. We're now, the GDP is growing each year for the next 5 years. Now, if you think about it, an industrialized first world or whatever you want to call it economy, a lot of those places, they aim for about 2% growth per year. Yeah, and if they're growing at 2%, they're happy. Yeah, China aims for about 6%, but the reality is 2%. If the UK gets 2%, it's happy. We're looking at 5% next year, 6.6, 2.3, 1.7, and 1.8. Yeah, so actually, if you look at the Office of Budget Responsibility, I think I said OBS before, OBR. They're actually effectively growth for the next 5 years, which is good. And for the next 2 years in particular, 5%, 6.6. Yeah. And what they're saying is those 3 asterisks on my page is pretty much saying that it's until the Q4 2022 before we get to pre-COVID levels. Okay. Which, that's important, but it's not so important. What it means is from now on in, things should get better, not necessarily much worse. All right. That's their predictions. Now, remember, the OBR is an independent body set up, and they don't report to the government. They don't, so they should be doing things right. Okay. And I think that's really interesting, so to see that, I think that's sobering, and it's quite good news, because this is the government saying this. And yes, you can say, hold on, it's government. Of course they're going to say that. But actually, there's a lot of times with the OBR has been very much the government will say this, and they'll say, we think this. So, I think that's quite realistic. I think next year, we'll see some things, maybe not through the winter, but I think, to be fair, then we come out the spring bounce, things will get back, and we'll start rebuilding. But again, that's measured with the unemployment rate and making sure that keeps not too high. And the reality is they've said that it could get to 7.5%. It's at 4.8 now, 7.5. So that's still quite high, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not unmanageable. And I think that's important. So look at this, unemployment. Yeah, so effectively 4.8, but look, the bottom line with this, and I just mentioned this obviously, what they're doing is creating programs and spending, and it's still the central focus. Yeah, and I think that is important above all else. Okay, is that they're spending 2.9 billion here for a 3-year UK-wide program. 1 million long-term unemployed people. They're going to protect the lowest by the national living wage, and that's for anyone that employs. Every year the living wage goes up. So for instance, if you've got someone on the living wage, you might have to add $300 bucks a month or a year to their wage to maintain that minimum standard for them. So it's what do I say? It's interesting because on one hand, normally I'd be saying be measured, be this, be that, be careful. But actually, to be fair, one of the questions, and maybe I should cover this next week, is this Boris who's a genius, or is this Rishi who's a genius, or is this the team around them that are really good at making good decisions? Look, I don't know. To be fair, I still question Boris, some of the things he does, and whether, I don't see him on the forefront like I do Rishi. Maybe, Rishi's just a friggin' genius and he's doing great, making great moves. Obviously the government's got the issues, but we'll see what happens. But yeah, look guys, in the comments, write what you think. If you agree with me, if you don't agree with me, I'm happy to have a bit of discourse, on this, because it is almost surreal when you think about it as to whether, is this really genius? Is this luck? Is this something that's actually just going to run out? It's hard because we've never seen this before in this thing, not in the last 300 years, and arguably the records from back then don't really make things too clear, So, yeah, look, the other side, and I think this is a really important side, is the green revolution, and I think we're now going to see a lot more of this. Obviously, we've gone through a period, and in some ways, Trump did us a favor. Trump did us a favor because he was so anti-green revolution, so anti-climate change, that it almost created a stark contrast of actually, we don't want to be like Trump. We want to be like this. And effectively what they're coming out with, a 10-point plan. But you know what? Forget the detail here. The important thing is what you're starting to see is governments all around the world now starting to go, you know what? This is important. We need to start creating industries around green, around climate, around all these sort of things. We need to, because if we don't, obviously then our children are screwed. And I don't know about you guys, but I've got 4 children, and I want to make sure that they've got a reasonable world that they inherit, that I didn't screw up, and that my parents, I'm not saying anything about my parents, but my parents' generation didn't screw up for them, and my parents' generation didn't screw up for them because of our greed. So I think we're starting to see more of this across all governments, and if anything, it's a good thing, because actually, when you look at the political will with the technology and you put the two together, it's entirely possible to turn around a lot of these issues. And if you haven't, I encourage you to watch the I forgot the name of it, the Richard Attenborough, the special that he's just done. Because it is eye-opening. And here's a guy who has seen the effects of climate change and deforestation and the thing we've done to the planet. And we can sit there and say it wasn't us, and make all sorts of things, but really that's just self-invested greed. So yeah. Clean energies, another one. Clean energies. I mean, the amazing thing is we already have the ability to capture all the carbon that we've actually released and store it. Yeah. Now, the interesting thing, £1 billion for carbon capture and storage infrastructure. And for me, that's the most important thing there. Yes, we can talk about, hydrogen carbon production, wind, nuclear and alternate source of energy. But I think the interesting thing is that when we look at this and the carbon capture, and basically carbon is, because we've been burning all this oil, it's been releasing carbon, we now have the ability and we have the technology already to capture it. It's just that the cost to do that is cost prohibitive. The moment we start going, you know what, no, this is something we need to do, we just make it happen, it's amazing the changes that we will make on this planet, and we may be able to turn things around. And there's a great book by, if you haven't read it, it's called Paul. I'll put a link in the description. It's by Paul Zane Pilzer. It's quite an old book. I think it's in the 80s or 90s when I first read it. Paul Zane Pilzer. It's called Unlimited Wealth. And one of the things he talks about, because I sort of, economics is one of the sort of subjects that I loved. And the interesting thing was that economics is all about the study of the allocation of scarce resources. And that's, first session of, when I did it at school and university, that's what you learn about, the allocation of scarce resources. Paul Zane Pilzer's book, one of the things he challenges is the fact that, that's wrong, and the basis of economics is wrong because you've got this thing called technology. And technology continuously comes to the solution of many of our problems. For instance, we had an oil crisis back in the 70s that said we're running out of oil. We're, at this rate, the rate we're burning, we're going to lose, run out of oil, and therefore all civilization will stop. Yeah. Then what happened? They come up with the carburetor, which made it X amount of times more efficient to run cars, and all of a sudden, the supply of oil, which was this much they thought to be, I mean, they've found more since then, but all of a sudden now, because of the carburetor, now it was effectively this much, and there wasn't an oil crisis. Okay. And that, on that basis, and that whole thing is one of the reasons why I have a lot of faith that things are going to get better. And I realise, this is probably high level from, being a property investor, but I think it's important because I think as property investors, we also have a social responsibility. Okay, so the other side is that this, they're putting 15 billion into high-tech economy or high science. And the interesting thing is, and I learned this because some of our clients are actually, you talk about, being a rocket scientist, things like that. But the UK actually has, massively world-class science and technology. Okay, so we've talked previously about the fact that there's tech and startup, in London, and there's Manchester, and there's Birmingham, that sort of places. But the reality is, if you go to Derby, Derby, I think it is the second highest average wage outside of London. You go, the hell's in Derby? But the reality is there's so many aerospace engineers there building engines for Rolls-Royce and nuclear power so actually the UK has a lot of high-tech jobs, and they're not necessarily in London, they're all around. Now some people might say, hold on, aerospace is dead because of the coronavirus, because we're leaving the EU, and therefore Airbus is going to say, get lost, we don't need you UK, it's a EU initiative. Who knows what's going to happen there? But the reality is we have a lot of talent there that isn't just going to get up and leave. So those sort of things, it's great that they're spending money in that. Yeah, and I think that will over time play out in our favor, okay, which is really good. Cool. So guys, I haven't had any questions yet, but if you've got questions, if you feel free to pump them into the thing. Stamp duty holidays, stampede drives soaring UK property market. Yeah, look, approvals of October reached, highest level since 2007. Okay, great. And one of the things I've started to see now is people saying that actually, this is what happened pre-2007, and then all of a sudden in 2008 we went into the global financial crisis, so 2021, that potentially will happen as well. I think one of the issues is a lot of people try and fit a model into, right, that was what happened there, so therefore this happens here, because there is this concept of history repeats. The thing I think is history repeats, absolutely, and we go through cycles and that, but it doesn't repeat exactly the same way. So yes, we may go into a recession like 2008. Yes, we may, it may be that the same circumstances are now. I'm not really seeing it. I'm seeing different circumstances. Last time we were austerity, this time we're investment, stimulus. So very different reactions. And that's one of the reasons why, people who say, well, we're going to go into the Great Depression, like we did in the 20s, 30s. I don't see it because I see our reaction was different. The circumstances looked the same, but back then we basically clamped everything down. We protected the gold standard and we raised interest rates and mopped up all the cash. This time we're printing money and printing money and printing money, which has worked out really, really good. That's quite interesting. But I think for me, it's very different circumstances now. And I think actually it'll be interesting to see how things go now, okay? So the other thing, house price inflation, guys. So, the interesting thing with house price inflation, if you have a look here, so this is the Office of Budget Responsibility again. Yeah, they're saying, look, here's the yellow line is the March forecast, okay? And basically, that was what it was, which wasn't actually that much of a drop. The reality is then they went the Financial Stability Report central scenario. And so this is a scenario. So this isn't necessarily reality. That was their first prediction, okay? Which basically, you're looking at an 8% drop. This is in house prices, so 8% drop. Then now November forecast looks very similar, but the two distinctions are it's pushed back to 2022 and the peak, in 24 is only 7.5%, whereas they were predicting over 10%. And I think that's, I think when you have a look at that, that's an interesting perspective because, yes, okay, so we're saying, well, house prices may drop. I'm saying 3% next year. And I think when you look at the fan chart, this is not the worst case. This is the realistic worst case, what I'll call it. So we may get some house price drops next year. But I think the other side of it is, and this is what we've been saying for a long time, was that, depending on where you are, if you're in central London, best fundamentals, you're probably not likely to see as much of a drop than if you're in the middle of Timbuktu. I know Timbuktu is not a place, but I don't want to name a place because I get into trouble on the comments. But in Timbuktu in the middle of nowhere, that may experience even more of a drop. Or if the businesses in that area which rely, that relies upon that go bust, then actually the whole, that can affect that market. So I think, it's very much like that. So we've got a wait there. Sorry guys, I got glasses. So Tim's asking, here we go. So is it now too late to take advantage of stamp duty holiday if you've not already had an offer accepted? If not, what would you assess to be the cutoff date? Do you know what's interesting? I think it probably is too late, only because chatting to various solicitors and that, they are absolutely ram-packed. And I think the issue is we're coming into a slow period. They want to have holidays. And let's face it, solicitors generally take, Christmas holidays, things like that off, but they've got such a backlog of work. I mean, I've spoken to a few of my mates who are solicitors on various bits and pieces, and they're like, Brett, can't accept any more work. We're absolutely, we've taken on too much work. So will that be done by April and get things back? Look, it may well be. Will they extend it by then? I think it's likely. I know if you go back 4 weeks ago, I said, no, it's not likely to be extended. And to some degree, I backed that up. But I think because there's so much of pent-up demand, pipeline that hasn't made it through, I think that's one of the issues. So potentially they may well extend things. All right. So so hopefully that answers that question. When do I think the cutoff is? I think you probably already missed the cutoff, because I think, let's face it, stuff doesn't get started. We're almost in middle of December. By the middle of January, things will start to pick up again. That's not a lot of time, because if you were to, buy a property mid-January, you can expect 3 months on the mortgage at least, if not more, which puts you over the April deadline. But you may see that they extend that, but I won't say for everybody. I think it'll be targeted more, and I think that's what you'll see next year. Is a lot of the support will be more targeted towards certain segments and that sort of stuff. Okay, hopefully that helps that. So average price, interesting here. For years I've said the biggest assumption in property is that it doubles every 7 to 10 years. Yeah, and I think if you look at this, you've got 100 London 116%, 143% is Manchester, 98, 112. Now this is not 10 years, this is 20 years. Yeah. And if you think about it, London has been a star performer. Manchester has been a star performer. These are places where actually house prices have gone up, but nowhere near doubling every 7 to 10 years. Now, the key here with this is average house prices. Yeah, and I think, as I've said, and I'll say it again and again and again, is that you've got to look for the places with the best fundamentals. Because the places with the best fundamentals have probably outperformed those statistics, and the places with less fundamentals have probably underperformed. Yeah, so we're talking about average. Yeah, but nowhere was 200%. Which is interesting. So I think that's telltale. That's telltale of two things. That's telltale of austerity. That's telltale of investment. And that's telltale, finally, of the fact that when I first started in the market 25 years ago, you could expect to get 10, 15%, no problems. It was kind of expected. That's what the returns that you wanted to earn on your money. If you look at the last decade, if you expected, you probably went to 5 to 8% realistically, net. Yeah. And now what you're finding is that's getting squeezed and squeezed and squeezed, which actually plays true to that. So, I no longer say the biggest assumption in property is it doubles every 7 to 10 years. Yeah. We used to do that for 20 years ago, and even 10 years ago, we used to say that. But we sort of stopped saying that, come the last GFC. Yeah. Because certain areas, and to be fair, I continue to say it, but I put the big asterisk sign on it that said, only if it's got the best fundamentals. And I think now, yes, if you've got the fundamentals, then potentially you've got the chance to do that. So James has just asked a question. There's a lot of liquidity pumped into the economy. Do you think that will create inflation in asset prices? Okay. So the short answer is yes, I do. Do I think it's going to be, stupidly, massive growth in asset prices? I think the thing to understand here is and it's a double-edged sword. The one thing is, if you own an asset that's 500,000 now and becomes £1 million because of inflation, yeah, at the same time the buying power of the 500 and the million is the same, then actually you haven't made any real money. It's not like you've got double the buying power. And I think that's a key distinction with inflation. Is we may say, well, it's gone from 500 to $1 million, that's great, but what's the inflation done? Yeah. The other side of it is if you've got debt against that 500,000, now what happens? The inflation's gone up, but actually the debt has actually come down. So the buying power to pay off the debt is effectively helped you out. So if you've got an asset that has debt against it, then inflation is good. Deflation works the opposite way. So remember, we may have the other way, where if we haven't pumped enough money in, if we're not stimulating the economy, we may get into stagflation or deflation. They're still possibilities. Nobody's saying that this is not, and even though I'm reasonably optimistic, I'm also, particularly cautious about what I say, because we could get into a stagflation situation. We could get into a deflationary cycle. Yeah. And I think that's when you start to realize that these are still possibilities, you've got to weigh and measure these sort of things. But I think, look, a lot of liquidity pumped in, 100%, and I haven't looked at it the last month or so, but it was 40%. The money supply has increased by 40%. That has to find a home somewhere, because that money is looking to get a return. And it doesn't matter where it is. Even if you pay it to an employee, whether they put it into their mortgage to pay their debt off, whether they buy a new house, whether they buy cars, whether they buy clothes, it'll eventually end up in asset prices somewhere, in the stock market somewhere. Yeah, it'll end up somewhere like that. And I think that's key. All right. Do I think it'll create assets inflation? I don't think it will increase. I don't think inflation right now is a major problem. Okay, so hopefully that answers that. We'll see over the next few years where that goes to, because remember, the governments haven't stopped printing money. Yeah, they're still printing more and more and more money, and at some point it may get to the point where some countries will start to pull it back in, other countries will keep printing and printing and printing. I mean, if you look at realistically, since the US come off the gold standard, they have been printing money, and all they've done is they've said, well, this is the debt ceiling. And then what happens when they reach the debt ceiling? They raise the debt ceiling, and they raise the debt ceiling. But they can, because the economy is expanding. Yeah. So it's, this, as much as, the fiat meisters and the guys that say, we need to, fiat, currency's dead and it's terrible and it's going to crash and we need to go back to a gold standard, or, or the new though guys which say, oh, look, Bitcoin is the solution and we should all jump onto Bitcoin now because that is the modern equivalent of the gold standard. I think they're missing part of the point. I get the arguments with that, and I get fiat country, but the reality is the way the fiat currency works is, we're becoming quite technical on how we deal with this. Yeah. And, most people said, well, the US economy has to tank during the GFC, the last recession. But you know what? They kept inflating. They kept pumping money in, pumping money in, pumping money in, pumping money in. And you know what? They got all the way through to the next one. And it's looking like they may well continue to do that, and it may well continue to work for them. And this is one of the interesting things, is a lot of people are sitting there going, well, actually, if it works for them, it can probably work for us. So we'll see. Guys, any other questions, pump them through. I got another one from Tim here. Do you still recommend holding off fixing the mortgage for a fixed term? Are you expecting interest rates to remain low despite the liquidity situation? Okay, so first of all, yeah, I'm not recommending, holding off on fixed rates. I think you've got to look at your own situation, and part of your own situation is you've got to look at, what you're planning on doing in terms of building a portfolio. You got to look at what your, sensitivity is in terms of your income. Do you have lots of disposable income, little disposable income? There's a number of questions that need to be answered before you can answer whether you should go onto a fixed term or a variable term. And look, guys, the best thing to do there is to speak to a mortgage broker, because they will have the products and they can go, well, this is the products that you've got available. Okay, are you expecting interest rates to remain low despite the liquidity? Yeah, I am. There's no, I've said it many times, but the way I look at interest rates is I just simply go to the 2-year, the 5-year, and the 10-year fixed rates, and I see what they're doing to get a sense for what lenders think is going to happen to interest rates. And for the next 10 years, interest rates aren't really going. They're going up slightly, but not that much. Yeah. So for me, I'm not even worried about whether a fixed or variable. Now, probably what Tim's talking about is what I may have said is I'm probably not that worried about fixing right now because I want the flexibility. But part of that is because I'm looking to sell some property and buy some property, do some deals, and things like that. So I want more flexibility. So I don't necessarily want to lock things in. And some of my properties are on variable rates. If I move them to fixed rates, I'm on, and I've got mortgages which date back to like pre-crisis, where they are, 0.5% above base, and they're a base rate tracker, So I've got mortgages like that sort of stuff, 1% above, 2% above, this sort of thing. Yeah. And because of that, it doesn't suit me to fix them. And that's why I say, whatever your situation, the best thing to do is to speak to someone you trust, someone that knows what they're doing. Yeah. Don't listen to the news and don't listen to, the forums and Facebook groups and things like that say, because you'll get 100 opinions, and that's not necessarily the right thing for you. Okay. Cool. So some exciting stuff here. Brexit Festival. Now, what's interesting? Don't snark. This Brexit Festival may turn out to be just the tonic we need. 100% agree. Here's what else the 29 million could have paid for. And it's not 29 million. It's 29 million to get it started. It's actually 120 million that they're expecting to cost. Now, what is this Brexit Festival? Now, I am 100% supportive of this. Partially because I love a good party, and partially because I think part of the thing is we have to redefine ourselves as a country. Yeah, Brexit has been so polarizing in terms of Brexiteers and Remainers, and the issue with that is that now Brexit is happening. Whether we like it or not. The reality is we've got to try and bring the country back together. But more than that, this is a marketing exercise. We have to redefine ourselves as a country to the rest of the world. And so by putting this Brexit Festival on, and we're talking about, I think it was 2022. 2022 it was. In 2022, I think actually it's a bloody good idea. And I think we'll get the opportunity to redefine ourselves as a country outside of Europe. Now, interestingly, I don't think most people realize, but we are actually a country that actually has huge amounts of influence in the arts, in movies, in all this sort of, these sort of the arts-based things. I mentioned science before, but arts is another thing. Highly evolved industries in that. Yeah. So something like this could be just the thing that we need. And as the article said, the festival may turn out to be just the tonic we need. Not just we need, but the world needs to know who we are going forwards. And I think that's key. Yeah. So for me, there's bloody good news. And I think that's actually what we need. Got a question here from Himansu. Do you feel the fact that Pfizer's vaccine has now been approved, that this will have a positive impact on the UK and global economy? 100%. What people are looking for and what the markets are looking for right now is an end date, an expiry date on COVID. And this potentially gives it. Now, whether that expiry date is, December 31st, March 31st, July, December, it doesn't much matter. The fact is we now see that we can actually have a vaccine where we can have an end date on this. So yes, it may mean that 2021 is a bit subdued because we have to distribute it and produce it and this sort of thing. But as I've said previously, there are multiple, I think there's 59 different vaccines that are in the stage 3, I think it's 15 vaccines that are in stage 3 right now. Yeah, so it's not just going to be Pfizer's vaccine that's available. And what you've already seen a number of countries do is pre-order and almost prepay, for distribution and things like that. So do I think it's going to have a positive impact? Yeah, I do. I think it'll have a great impact. And I think more than anything, the markets are about perception. So if you can create a positive perception of things that are going on, that actually goes a long way to house prices growing, to people getting jobs, to entrepreneurs starting new businesses, to and the whole gamut of things that help the economy out. Okay, so yeah, that's I think it's a great question because we are starting to see some positive, and the fact that it's been approved. I mean, look, on my comments the other day, I had someone come out and say, you've got no idea, you're, sheep for, don't even know what he said, something about being a sheep and mindless, thinking that, people are going to take this vaccine. It's like, you know what? I would rather trust the science, even if it may be perceived as being rushed through, than the conspiracy theory, which actually is very easy to debunk in most cases, And let's face it, I think that is actually, one of the things I find interesting. I'm more of a scientist than I am a conspiracy theorist. I read all conspiracy theories because I like to see what's there, and I like to be able to delve into them and see what the chances or the reality is. Cool. So, just finish off with a human question. What's the greatest lesson of learning property investing that you wish someone told you when you started? Jesus, newbie. All right. So Roxanne. So what's the greatest lesson? That's pretty full on. So the greatest lesson will be to start. Yeah. And that might say, look, I can say read the books. I can say, go to the seminars. I can say, do your due diligence. I can say, focus on your finance, remortgage, like all this sort of stuff. But the reality is the biggest barrier that I see to people getting started, is that you are going to find, and because you're starting out, you're going to find every reason why to do it and why not to do it, And I think the reality is to take that first step and understand what I'm saying here. It's almost like I would prefer you took action and lost money on the first property than actually not to take any action and be 5-10 years down the track. Because it's amazing what you'll learn by just taking that first step. Journey of 1,000 miles, begins with the first step. And that doesn't mean rush in. Yeah. So I would say don't rush in, absolutely. And the other thing is if the industry is full of, people that are, sales process, people, and they've got a refined sales process. I've been doing property sales for over 25 years. So there's a defined process to it. It's interesting. My team use a very different process, but for the most part, the industry is taught in exactly the same way, and they use exactly the same, methodology, exactly the same closes, exactly the same urgency closes. So there's that element. But I think more than anything is go out there, follow the process, learn the rules of the game, do all that, and then get started. Because I can tell you, I'd rather have someone who failed, succeeded, than someone who didn't try, and never got off the ground. Failure to launch. So that for me is the biggest lesson of them all. So guys, any other lessons? Happy to take them. I think we actually did that one already, so that's okay. So that's all the lessons were there. So the one final thing that we should probably mention is Brexit transition. Time is running out. New rules for businesses and citizens. I actually stole this off the HMRC website. 31 days to go. Actually, sorry, that's 30 days to go now. I printed it out yesterday. Interestingly, there's a great tool here. If you have a business that does transactions or business with EU companies, go onto the website. Go onto the gov.uk/transition, I think it is, and have a look at that, because actually it takes you through a step-by-step. Do you invoice companies that are EU companies? Do you have stationery that's goods that are in the UK? Do you cross-border stuff? Do you all this? And it takes you through a whole process, and then it gives you literally a checklist of things you need to worry about. So actually, it's a good little tool. Just jump on and check it out. It's worthwhile looking at. Look, Brexit 31 days. I still think we're going to get a deal. I still think they will pull it off. As much as we're hearing no, but there's as much as there's no, there's yes, and I think they will. But as I've said, it won't be a substantial deal that goes, wow, we won that deal. It'll be pretty much both sides will be able to say they won, they pulled it off, and politically, it'll be a political deal. I think that's just how it's going to be. So, guys, I think that's it for this week. If you've got no more questions, we'll leave it there. don't forget, make sure you subscribe and click the like button. And if you want to be reminded of this, obviously we're coming to you every week at about 12:30 London time, 4:30 Middle East, and I think it's 8:30 Singapore. But yeah, by all means, if you've got questions, you can go to webinars at gladfish.com. Gladfish.com, and I'm happy to answer those questions for you. But otherwise, if there's no other questions, guys, have a fantastic day or night, depending on where you are in the world. And look forward to chatting to you next week. All right, guys, see you later. Bye.